today we have the Commissioner of Police, Commissioner Stephen Corbishley. He's been the Commissioner of Police since August 2018, and we're grateful to have him on our show today. We have a few questions prepared for him, but we're hoping to get some buy-in from the public as usual. So whatever questions you have, any comments, I know that it certainly has probably been a trying time for our police officers over the past 2 months. And so we're eager to have the Commissioner of Police up on screen with us. Welcome.
Commissioner, how are you?
Yeah, good, Aaron. Good, Ryan. Nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Okay, just for future, I'm Ryan, and Aaron is my brother there next to you on the screen. So thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to have you up with us here for the COVID-19 special series. How have you been?
Yeah, I think I had my first day off for about 12 weeks on Sunday, and I didn't know what to do with myself. And I went back into work. So it's been really busy. And I think when anyone reflects on where we are, none of us could have imagined being in this position 12 months ago, where pretty much all aspects of social life has changed. And I echo the point that you said at the beginning, which is sort of thoughts are really with those that have lost loved ones and those that perhaps are facing this virus, because it's easy, I think, to dismiss, but it is touching everybody, and it is an invisible enemy that we have got to follow quite clearly the Ministry of Health's plan in how we tackle it. But we've been working hard, obviously, from the police service, working within the Ministry of National Security, great support working alongside the Royal Bermuda Regiment. And I can explain a bit more as we go on about the kind of things we're doing, but we're doing some things that are very different than we've ever done before.
Okay, so how have your day-to-day operations from the Bermuda Police Service, like COVID-19, as you say, it's an invisible enemy, it's a virus, the Health Council have guidance. How did you manage to transition your team to transition into that guidance so quickly?
Yeah, I think there's some really big cultural issues in how we've had to go forward with this, because essentially we're applying law enforcement against what otherwise would be normal behaviour. So things like, returning home at particular times at night, the physical distancing aspect as well, shopping on particular days. And it would be very easy to become quite draconian around it and punitive. And that is sometimes not the right way to approach these things. You've got to work with communities. I mean, it's an essential part of policing anyway. Unless you've got the trust and confidence of your community, then you pretty much will fail. So in the early stages, it was around the kind of visibility, presence and communication. And I think when you looked at the advisory points we first had on the island, and a lot of people have said, oh, what difference did that make? Well, the difference it made was it made people aware, it made people informed, and it made people behave in a particular way. And that created, I think, a pattern of behaviour that we've continued. And we see some breaches and we see some problems that we've got to address. But by and large, it's actually the community that have helped police this. And from the policing side, we've just been there to support and deal with perhaps some of the more difficult issues or individuals that want to go against the regulations and cause a health threat to others. Certain aspects of policing has changed. I mean, our demand has changed. Certainly within lockdown, things like burglary fell dramatically, which is obvious because people are stuck at home. But we saw an increase concerningly around domestic violence, domestic abuse. And I know we'll touch on that because it's quite poignant with the investigation we've got going on in regards to Chevelle Dillon Burgess. And it's something I'm very passionate and committed towards. But we saw a rise, and sometimes rises in crime people seek to criticise, but when things are going on behind closed doors that otherwise are not being reported, when I see a rise, I actually see that as about victims being more confident in telling the police about what's going on, and us being able to work in partnership to look after them. So it's been very dynamic, and it's sometimes very strange. And I think we all pinch ourselves into the fact we're walking around with masks on, going shopping on a Tuesday and not a Wednesday. But it's probably the most significant event, and perhaps you'll agree, it's the most significant event that's happened in my lifetime, and probably many others.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, Commissioner, you touched on something that was interesting. You said that the police are policing behavior that is otherwise considered normal. You also mentioned domestic violence, and I think that's an interesting point that we'll probably touch on a bit later. But with regards to policing normal behavior, a lot of people in the community, or maybe not a lot, but obviously, we have had a state of emergency. There have been certain regulations for shelter in place that have been implemented. People's rights have been temporarily restricted. You already touched on some of the things that you need to do in order to maintain confidence, but how do you sort of balance being granted extra powers during a time like this with sort of preventing the fear of what some might call a police state?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, the one thing that police officers possess is discretion. And discretion is a really powerful tool for police officers, because it allows you to make a judgment at that time in regards to what a person says, what a person has done, and the reasons behind it. And we're not the Gestapo. We're not there to punish anybody that, for instance, steps on a crack on the paving stone. I mean, we actually follow a model which is the 4E's model. I've got to remember it now, but it's the encourage, engage, and explain. So the engagement, obviously, professional contact with somebody, advisory points, or just simply stopping them, explaining to them the health guidance, encourage them to follow it. And I would suggest 95% of the people that use that 3-step process, by and large, is no problem. And the final E, which is enforcement, is what we will do. If people don't comply, or we see something that's a significant risk, then we take enforcement action. And some of that has included arrest, reports for summons. And it goes back to the point around policing what essentially is normal. We're not policing criminals. We're policing Mr. and Mrs. Bermuda and their children. And we will come out of this. And for me, it's about having a positive relationship, not just then, but now. The style of policing's just got to be right. It's got to be communicative. I don't know if you've picked up, but I've started doing lots of vlogs now on Facebook. And I just thought I'd try it out. And I haven't done it for myself, but I just want to be a bit more transparent about how the police works, a bit more honest about what we're trying to do, and get feedback from the community. And if that relationship works well, it's amazing what you can achieve as opposed to relying on law enforcement.
Absolutely. The vlogs, we've seen some of those, and definitely interesting, and I would say perhaps a bit unusual for a police commissioner, at least in Bermuda, that is. Was that something that was sparked due to the shelter-in-place regulations? Can you give us a bit of your thought process on that? What made you, as a police commissioner, decide to start doing daily sort of selfie videos and posting them online?
I don't know. I mean, I like social media. I think it's a really good vehicle of communicating. And I mean, I'm sort of like the white grey-haired guy from the UK, so what do I know? But I did one, and there was some good feedback, and it was a good way of getting things across. And I decided to do a couple more, and the feedback was really positive. And then sort of, particularly Facebook's very popular in Bermuda, as you know, and the amount of people that started sort of following, and it's not for my ego, it's just part of the police service. It's just a really good way of getting stuff across. And then I think with the kind of COVID issue, it's quite a dynamic situation. So the updates, I think, were valuable to be given on each and every day. And then, of course, the Chevelle Dylan Burgess, which I think has grabbed the community's attention and their concern. So I wanted to keep people up to date with that. So again, confidence and trust that we're doing everything we can to find Chevelle. And I think I'm in a position now where I'm probably going to do vlogs every day. I actually quite enjoy it. I enjoy talking to the public, but more importantly, I enjoy sort of getting their feedback, because there's some really good suggestions that have come back to me that otherwise I wouldn't have received. And the BPS is part of the community. And if we build a good relationship, we can do so much more collectively. So whether that be around COVID, whether it be around domestic violence that we just spoke about, or whether or not we deal with gun crime and gangs, which obviously is and continues to be a significant risk for our community.
Yeah, I personally like the vlog submission, and I'll tell you why. You touched on it. You were very candid, and I do appreciate that. Is that you are a white Englishman leading the Bermuda Police Service, and so you know historically there is an entrenched or there is an entrenched divide in the viewpoints as to who should be leading the police service. So I think, notwithstanding that those are viewpoints that are strong viewpoints and opinions that people have in our community, at the end of the day, we all still need to be protected and policed. And so to garner that trust, to keep that trust with the everyday citizen, to understand that you're not just somebody sitting in an office, but you are in tune with the everyday issues of Bermudians. So notwithstanding that it started as a result of COVID-19, I'm pleased to hear that it's going to continue throughout, because one of the things that I can say, certainly during my short lifetime, is that, and I've seen 3 commissioners, starting with Mr. Jackson, who was succeeded by, I think it was Michael De Silva, as the commissioner. And out of those 3 during my lifetime, I can certainly say in your short span and your short tenure thus far, you have been one that has been most engaged in the public and in the community. And perhaps that's because of COVID-19, but the reality is we look forward to it moving forward. Bermudians are very personable people, and hopefully that...
That's a really good point. I mean, I know it flashed up on the screen that, like, Stephen Corbishley, 27 years experience, but just a little bit about myself. I grew up in Manchester, and I grew up in a really diverse community, and they're all different ethnicities, religions, and so on. And it was really healthy for me, because I think now sort of I like multiculturalism, and Bermuda is a very diverse community, and certainly the Bermudian culture I absolutely love. And somebody you may have seen the vlog I did about when I got Bermudian culture wrong when I arrived on the island. I won't mention it, it's a daytime program, but the way in which I am as a person, I value relationships, and I think the police service is there to protect and to be kind. And if you get those relationships right, you get trust, and if you get trust, you get engagement, and if you get engagement, you actually find collectively we can do so much more. And okay, yeah, I'm the white guy with grey hair from the UK, but I like to think I'm part of the Bermuda community. So I have a job as the commissioner, but I'm also somebody that has made their home in Bermuda, and I'm very proud of that.
Yeah, so I think it was a timely thing. We've touched on it very, shortly so far in 2 brief excerpts, but I think it's probably an appropriate time to phase into the topic of the hour for Bermudians, because we've seen throughout COVID-19 that we had the disappearance of a young woman. You yourself have given various press conferences on that topic. Can you just expand? I know that we received a press update on Saturday to confirm that someone had been arrested. I know there are legal barriers and things that you cannot speak about, but to the extent that you can expand on that update, where we are now on Tuesday, 72 hours since Saturday.
Yeah, I can. I mean, Chevelle was last known to be seen on the 11th of April. That's the date that we think she was last seen. But the report didn't come into the police service till the 30th of April from her mother. So there was a significant period. And the reason why I mentioned that is because there was lots of comments on social media around why the police hadn't moved quickly enough. Well, we simply didn't know until the 30th of April. And obviously, when you deal with missing person inquiries, there's often a rationale behind why they've gone missing. And tragically, a short time before Chevelle, we lost two gentlemen who had gone missing, and there were issues around dementia and so on. So people can go missing for certain reasons. But Chevelle's disappearance as a young woman with a child is one that would concern anyone, particularly for the police. And there's aspects of her life which I know has been spoken about on social media that again caused us concern. So we began an inquiry which is largely around searching for her, because that's the right thing to do, particularly for her family and her child. But as the investigation progressed, and it's a really difficult position to take, our concern, particularly around some criminal acts that may have taken place around her, and then ultimately whether or not she's been kept somewhere, and then actually whether or not the gravest of harm has come to her. And that, unfortunately, is the conclusion that we've come to. And a decision was made, and in consultation with the DPP, because the BPS doesn't sort of ride roughshod over this, but a decision made to arrest a 39-year-old male. He was with us over the weekend, and we interviewed him, and he was released on bail. And bail was a natural part of the criminal justice process, because this is quite a complex inquiry. But some points to make are that, firstly, investigating homicides where the victim is not found is not unusual. Convictions have taken place in other parts of the world. And the BPS is receiving support from a UK police force that has dealt with two such matters. So there's some great value in that. The second issue is it doesn't mean we stop looking for Chevelle. And I sat down with the senior investigating officers this morning to discuss revisiting the search strategy. We're looking at some other options around canine dog support. We've got a dive capability, and again we're looking at more expertise, and we won't stop on that, because irrespective of the fact that we do think grave harm has come to Chevelle, her family need her back, so we're concentrating on that. And some comments I made on Saturday, and I had discussion with Wayne Keynes, Minister for National Security, and Mr. Keynes and I get on really well. And we work very closely, particularly around the gang agenda. And we both agreed that there's some issues that we need to look at around this case. Perhaps not now, but certainly at some point. In relation to domestic violence, and I have a phrase that now's not the time to blame, the time is to learn. And domestic abuse, and I use the word abuse because often people call it violence, like the physical violence, but it involves so many things. There's the kind of psychological abuse to victims, coercive, the kind of pressure on somebody, control, and so on. And quite often victims don't realise the extent that they are being abused. And in some cases, victims can't leave the relationship for a variety of different reasons, sometimes financial, other times children, and so on. And really there needs to be a partnership approach to address some of these issues. Law enforcement's only one part of it. And I think, and it's not unique to Bermuda, but sometimes there's cultural issues around domestic violence. I don't know, what happens behind a closed door is best left behind a closed door. And I think it shouldn't be a stigma, and we should talk about it more. And I think domestic abuse is everybody's business. It's the police's business, the court's business, government's business, social services, DCFS, everything. But it's also the business of a neighbour, it's business of a friend, and because that person can recognise a victim and can sometimes reach out for them, and we get people the help that they need. So it's a very strong passion for me, and it's an area where I don't think we're in a bad position, but I think we could do so much more, particularly if we work collectively.
Commissioner, I wanted to ask you, on that notion of domestic violence and such, without commenting on the specifics of any particular case, you do have instances, for example, where you have a complainant come before the courts, make a complaint, subsequently withdraw it, and bail conditions say that they live with the defendant in that complaint. Having regard to that reality, that we know that these things happen, what do you think that in your office, in conjunction with the DPP and Minister Keynes, and the Attorney General rather, can make amendments to law to assist these complainants in the future, perhaps?
Yeah, I think let's just split that in two parts. The priority is the victim. Okay, an offender's behaviour, courts and whatever, but the priority is protecting a victim. And more often than not, you see in cases the victim sometimes is reluctant to support. In many cases, they still love their partner. They want to forgive them. They want to, and recognising the fact that men can be subject of domestic abuse, domestic violence as well. It's not just women. And there's a big stigma around men suffering. So the issue is about signposting and getting that person, firstly, to a place of safety where they're not going to be abused. And that could be family, friends, but also there's other places in Bermuda. And almost getting them out of that environment. So, because quite a lot of psychological issues where they can realise the situation they're in and get support. In regards to law enforcement, yes, we do see quite a lot of victims that withdraw or don't want to go to court, but we work very strongly with the DPP's office to look at evidence in a variety of ways. Our officers have body-worn video cameras, and quite often when you will go and see a complainant of domestic violence, domestic abuse, you can see their demeanour. You can perhaps see an injury that they've suffered, and that then becomes evidence that can be used to take forward a complaint, because sometimes it's in the interest of the victim, irrespective of their wishes to prosecute. It's actually down to the police and the DPP, well, it's the DPP's office to decide whether to prosecute. But I think everything that we need to do needs to be centred around the victim. Yes, there's some work we need to do around offenders, because sometimes you get offenders that go from one relationship to another and the system and cycle of abuse continues. But it goes back to my earlier point. We need to talk about it more. We need to work together more. We need to share information more. And we need to make sure people trust the system, that they can reach out and they'll get help.
Specifically, Commissioner, I'm just referring to where do they go if, for example, it's not a reality for them to go to family?
There are places they can go, and some of those places are kept confidential. And the reason why they're confidential is that they're scared sometimes of their partner, and there are partners that will try and track them down. But we have, and one of the things that we invested in with the Bermuda Police Service was a vulnerable victims unit. So we deal with adult and child safety issues. And they are very well tied in with whether it be DCFS, and there's refuge places that we've got. And indeed, going back to the COVID point, we have seen a spike in domestic abuse. And to be honest, I'm not surprised. I think when you're contained within a household for an extended period, tensions rise, particularly if it's in a relationship that's already sort of tempestuous. And it's not flippant comment, but I think most of us only just survived Christmas when we're all together as a family. So the kind of pressure on relationships really high. And a statement I said on Saturday was to say to people, if you are afraid and you're concerned to your safety, particularly it happens late at night and sometimes alcohol's involved by the perpetrator, don't feel because it's a curfew you can't leave your house. If you can, leave the house. You won't be arrested. Go to a friend, go to a neighbour, or phone 911, and we will come out and we will look after you and make sure you're okay. People should never feel that they can't leave a situation because of these current regulations. I want them to leave, I want them to be safe, and we'll be there to look after them.
Ryan, over to you.
Yeah, Commissioner, you said an interesting phrase a bit earlier, which is that this is not the time for blaming, it's the time for learning. You've already put out sort of a statement surrounding domestic abuse. We've just heard some of your comments about how it affects us all, and that it's a neighbor problem and not just a behind closed doors problem. I'm just curious, when it comes to learning, what lessons do you think the police can learn from this particular situation, if any? And how would you extend that? What lessons can the community learn?
Yeah, I mean, I can't go into this specific case other than the fact I will say that we're looking at the whole history of Chevelle and her background, and perhaps what has happened, what could have happened, and so on. But it'd be wrong for me to make judgment on it. The reason why I use the term, I use it a lot in policing about learning and not blaming, is when you blame somebody, you just land the problem with somebody else. You don't sort the problem out, because you just say, oh, it's such and such's fault. And okay, there is accountability at times that leaders need to take. And I'll be the first to hold my hand up if the Bermuda Police Service has failed around an area, because I think the public wants that. They'd rather have an admission a mistake has been made rather than, I don't know, sort of excuses. But I think it goes back to that whole point around understanding the facts of matters, seeing what can be done better, strengthening sort of partnerships, particularly how we share information, because sometimes you can have families where 3 or 4 agencies are working around them, and maybe better communication can be done around those agencies, and really sort of just strengthening the work we can do. By and large, a lot of the stuff we deal with in policing are social problems. It's just that it happens to turn into crime. So if you take sort of gang issues, yeah, okay, we go out, we try and protect people, try and take guns off the street, and arrest those that are responsible. But the issue is, and similar position from the Ministry for National Security, is these problems start when kids are 11, 12 years old. Actually, they may start earlier with the way in which the kind of family environment is. And the kind of intervention you need, particularly around prevention, often starts far, far earlier than the big problems that you inherit. And again, that's about partnership working. It's about working across the board. And that is going on. There's some really good work out there, whether it be with the third sector, education, past the bean side of the business. And we need to stay confident on that, because whilst it might not show immediate results in the long term, it does make for a safer Bermuda. But guys, just want to say one thing though, I just on the violence, and I did get, not flack, but 2019 was the first time Bermuda had not seen any homicides for, and we went back over our records, but we reckon it's 25, 30 plus years. And a lot of people said, oh, well, yeah, it was luck, or it was this, or it was that. It wasn't. There was some really significant work done last year, whether it be around law enforcement, intelligence work, partnership work. And whilst very sadly, we've had 3 deaths this year, they're not comparable to perhaps what we've had in the years before. The job of the police service, the primary job of the police service, is to protect life. So can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I was just curious, why would you say that they're not comparable?
Well, they're not comparable. I mean, certainly one is that we had one gun-related homicide. We had a tragic stabbing last Saturday. And obviously we're investigating Chevelle's. The reason why I say they're not comparable is the years previously, and certainly before my time, the level of sort of gun-related gang violence was quite significant. And the point I'm saying is that I think it's easy to look at the glass as half empty, but I actually think there's a lot of really good work going on out there, particularly from some of our community leaders that are supporting us.
Okay, now, Commissioner, if you don't mind, I wanted to talk a bit more about the violence scenario. We've seen a bit of a spike. I mean, I guess you could say during the shelter in place and throughout all of this. Do you have any sort of line of thought around that? A lot of people would have thought, you know, you mentioned already, things like burglaries have gone down. Everybody's sort of sheltering in place and at one spot. But even during times when we're supposed to be on lockdown and everybody's supposed to be sheltered in, it seems as if in some areas, of course, crime doesn't stop. What is the police's feeling been sort of surrounding the past incidents that we've had, even as we sort of deal with the middle of a crisis?
Well, it's not helpful sometimes because practically it requires our officers to start undertaking significant investigations, which in the middle of a COVID pandemic also looks at their ability to physical distance and so on. I mean, we had the incident on Saturday night at Court Street, which was a discharge of a firearm, and thankfully no one was injured. Just prior, before we went into shelter in place, you'll recall that we had 5 shootings in pretty quick succession, where, okay, we believe we've arrested all the parties involved, but it still happened. And we mobilised probably the biggest number of police officers. It certainly was expensive for us to do, but it was the right thing to do in getting visible reassurance patrols in and around the centre of town, around Court Street and so on. So there's an element where I describe policing as an iceberg sometimes. The public will see what's on the top, but there's a lot of things going on underneath. We do a lot of intelligence work, a lot of covert inquiries, and we prevent 99 things more than the one that occurs. If you want honesty, yeah, I am concerned. There are guns on the streets of Bermuda. I don't think there's that many. I'm often asked how many, and I think I don't even think it's double figures, because we know that they get repeatedly used. But the worry I've got is that we've got some individuals in our community that the value of life means very little to them, and which causes me concern, because the value of their own life then needs to be looked at. But they're quite prepared over a dispute or argument to use a firearm to settle it. And apart from the fact that the danger it causes to themselves, it's the danger to the wider community. And I don't know if you remember, there was a shooting they discharged a weapon into a door, and there was a quite innocent family living at that house, and the daddy of that house was sat there most mornings with his very young child on the stair where the bullets entered, and it just so happened that morning he wasn't sat there. Imagine a situation where we lost a baby in Bermuda because of something like this. God forbid that would ever happen, but this is the risk that some of these guys present.
Yeah, so Commissioner, just moving on to some, I guess, higher level considerations. It was confirmed in this year's budget statement that the police would only receive $61.8 million for the year 2020 to 2021. In that regard, how has that, and that may have changed drastically as a result of COVID-19 with overtime hours and such, but how has that $4 million reduction compared to last year affected your daily operations?
What they say about the dinosaurs, if you don't sort of change, you sort of go extinct. It's, I mean, we've done a lot of changes within the service. about 78% of our budget relates to people. And then other part of our budget is two parts, is discretionary spend and non-discretionary. So non-discretionary is, I don't know, like how much we pay Belco for our utilities. So the non-discretionary amount is very, very small. And you're right, $4 million was sought from our budget to obviously support wider issues, government and the Ministry for National Security. We were able to, the number of police officers, we're budgeted for 425 police officers. So, and in reality, we've got slightly less than that. So we were able to reduce our headcount without actually any impact on our resources. And we were able to make some efficiency savings elsewhere. So we achieved what was sought. And obviously, we're looking closely at what government's requirements are going to be in going forward, because we're obviously a significant department for government, significant aspect of expenditure, and looking at how we cut our cloth. But the way in which we can do it is just about not being creative, but actually working out what matters most to the public. I made the decision when I got here to go back, and there's no such thing as a new idea, but we went back to the parish constable scheme. So we had dedicated resources in each of our parishes. We've invested back in schools, got schools officer at Berkeley. We've worked very closely with the locally deployed CID officers, because for me, the community model is the only right policing model. But we've also had to maintain capability around specialist crime. Bermuda has a significant financial industry, which is fantastic for Bermuda, but it's also highly attractive to organised crime around things like money laundering and other aspects of financial crime. So we've got to have the capability to investigate that. So cutting a long answer very short, we will just adapt. Sure. But we still commit to the things that the community need, which is visible policing that's there to assist.
Sure. So, Commissioner, on that topic, bearing in mind, or against the backdrop really of a reduction of $4 million in your budget, let's talk a bit about some other expenditure by the police service. You did mention to us, and we're grateful that you indicated that you have a great relationship with the Minister of National Security, Wayne Keynes. In September of last year, the Minister of National Security called for your department or your service, the Bermuda Police Service, to either fish or cut bait in relation to an investigation into the former Premier, Dr. Eron Brown. That's probably been over 7 years now and cost the taxpayers in upwards of $7 million. Bearing in mind that reduction of, the reduction in your budget, you indicated at that time, and that was in September, probably some six months to the date rather, with respect to that you would press on with these investigations. How do you justify continuing to spend that amount of money, recognizing that there are other investigations and a reduction in budget?
Okay, I mean, again, it was a point I raised before. Firstly, the investigation into Matty raised, I can't go into that other than the fact that it is a live investigation. The comments around the amount of money spent on it are largely misleading, because what they are is just a calculation of the officers that we have working for the Bermuda Police Service. So their salary, the amount of officers who work on it, calculated over that 7-year period. And that's not to say that they've worked on it full time. So in fact, it's quite a generous assessment of cost. So the BPS hasn't, overspent its budget. It's just utilised the resources that we've currently got. And that amount of money is reflective pretty much in the majority around a salaried officer's time on this case, whilst we've still been dealing with lots of other matters. The other additional spend is that it's like a lot of similar investigations, is around managing the legal process, which is exercised by those that are accused, and obviously we have to be legally represented as well. And I'm completely satisfied, and I do reject that the comment that the BPS have been wasteful around this. This is a matter that has been alleged, and our role is to take it to a point so the Department of Public Prosecutions can consider whether or not there are charges that need to be presented.
So from your view, Commissioner, and I guess against the backdrop that on the 20th, I believe, of March, the Court of Appeal had rendered a decision by the police service to be unlawful and awarded cost to the applicant in that matter. So that cost is going to be upwards of, it's your cost for your lawyers and then the cost of the applicant's lawyers. That's billions of dollars, if you will, over, a 2-3 year span. So just on a wider context, not in relation to that matter, but what we want to achieve justice, to what length do you say that an investigation can be ongoing and you can justify continuing to spend without charge?
Yeah, I think, I'm not saying you are, but some people suggest almost like the BPS are not on a witch hunt. The BPS are just obviously investigating the matter. And this is, it goes back to my point before, any defendant is entitled to exercise their right of judicial process. And there have been series of judicial reviews that have taken place in this case, which has significantly extended the timeline that otherwise would be seen with other investigations. But the police act without fear or favour, and we are not political. We are there, and quite rightly, for Bermuda and communities to have independent integrity to establish the facts of a certain matter. And whilst, yes, we've got to be prudent around the way in which we spend our resources, if an investigation is presented to us, that we will take it through the course of what is necessary. We have regular meetings with the DPP's office, and they are working with us, and I've pretty satisfied that at some point in the very near future, a decision will be taken.
Sure, appreciate that. I'm going to hand it over to Ryan now, but Commissioner, I just want to say, because I know Ryan's going to wrap it up, thank you for taking this time out. I know that you've got many important things to do, but thank you for your candid responses. I know we're certainly grateful, but the listening public is as well. So again, thank you for your time, and I'll hand it over to Ryan to wrap it up.
Commissioner, there was another interesting investigation that I would say is pretty high level in recent times. We got an update from that in January, and that was surrounding an incident involving the other prominent lawyer, Justin Williams. That there was an investigation sort of involvement with the Royal Bermuda Regiment, and the police were seeking his return to Bermuda. Obviously, with this pandemic, something like that is probably a bit difficult to coordinate. I'm wondering, do you have any updates surrounding sort of that issue?
You're right, Ryan. I mean, that's where we are on the COVID issue. We're in the process, and we're just working with the DPP's office because a couple of investigations similarly have been delayed because of people being overseas. It's amazing now how we're all used to Zoom. So we're just going through permission to be able to do a Zoom interview with the party you referred to interview him, which will take us to a point where we can discuss with the DPP about whether or not there are charges to be preferred on that case. So the delay is simply, as you rightly say, the accessibility, because the party has been in the United States, and we have been in touch with his legal representatives, but it looks like it's now going to progress via a video interview. We just needed to look at the legality of that, and we're reasonably satisfied it can go ahead.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Commissioner. We've had a pretty extensive conversation in the past 40 minutes or so. We talked a bit about the police COVID response. We talked about violence, crime, domestic abuse. We got to touch on the looming cloud situation as it relates to Chevelle Dillon Burgess, and we're wishing you as well as her family all the best as that investigation continues. And then we talked a bit, Eron and I, about sort of some of the high level investigations that continue to loom around everyone's heads in relation to sort of anticipated cuts to the Bermuda Police Service, and how you've had to adapt moving forward. So we didn't see too many questions from the general public, but we did see a lot of comments extending support and gratitude to you and the Bermuda Police Service, and we certainly echo those sentiments. So did you have any final words that you'd like to give to the community, or?
No, I didn't see the questions either because I got to wear my glasses to see the questions, so I'll have a look afterwards.
Oh, no, we didn't get many at all. I was saying there were mostly words of encouragement.
You didn't say get rid of him. Get him off.
No, I think, Commissioner, to be quite frank, it's because with your questions, what we found with some of our interviewees, and it varies with people's style, is some people are very short with their responses. But you, as you should, as the Commissioner of Police, have elaborated in detail, obviously demonstrating your passion and the fact that you are aware of these issues. Again, we'd like to thank you. On a closing note, and I know that we've got to go, we've got two more guests coming on after you, but on a closing note, what do you say? Can you give some words of reassurance to those in the community? We've heard about COVID-19, some of the technology surrounding that as it relates to the health side of it. But again, we're moving into a new normal, so to speak. Can you give a bit of comfort from the Bermuda Police Service perspective to the public who are concerned about overreaching of their privacy? For example, the tracking of data and information, or the tracking of movements, particularly when it comes to policing. I know that much of the tactics of the police are confidential and you can't go in depth of it, but can you give a bit of reassurance that you're going to balance the interests of justice with an individual's right to privacy?
Well, I don't know if you're football fans, but if it was a football, just don't tell me what team you support, because if it's Liverpool, I'm off. If this was a football analogy, I'd say we were in the second half and we're 2 or 3 goals up. And the most important thing is that we just stick together, work as a team, because we're doing well. And we're doing well. Obviously, the updates from the health minister shows that we're controlling the spread of COVID. But it's now around human behaviour. And I think we're in the kind of the challenging period where more places have opened, bars and restaurants, a temptation to be a bit more social, and particularly when you've got a couple of rum swizzles down you, it's hard. But the message I would say is we want to work with you. We don't want to work against you. We want to support you. We want people's information. And I want the Bermuda Police Service to be part of the community and a brand that people can trust and is transparent.
Well, thank you, Commissioner. Again, we appreciate your time. We appreciate your contribution. Look forward to speaking with you soon. But I know, again, on behalf of Ryan and I, on behalf of Bird News, and on behalf of our listening audience, we say thank you and we appreciate your contribution.
Thanks a lot, guys. You're doing a good job. Appreciate you.
All right. Take care. Ryan, I thought that was certainly refreshing interview. It's almost been a whole hour. That flew by. I think Mr. Corbishley is certainly one who elaborates it with substance on his responses to questions.
Yeah, and like you said, I echo your sentiments on why we probably didn't get a lot of questions. I think a lot of people were just along for the ride. We asked some pretty interesting questions. We ranged from, covering everything from COVID-19 to current investigations to sort of the police as an administrative organization. And certainly Commissioner Corbishley gave some pretty thorough responses, which seemed to be pretty holistic and covered not only his personal philosophy as it relates to policing, but also sort of the community aspect and how we should be adjusting and reacting as well. So thanks again to Commissioner Stephen Corbishley. And I think that was a really good interview, Eron.